The day my parents passed away, I stood frozen in front of their coffins, surrounded only by relatives and a few old friends. My wife, my 2 daughters, my in-laws' entire family. Not a single one of them showed up. They were busy hosting a BBQ to plan the wedding of my wife's younger brother. I had just buried my parents in solitude when the very next day they called me to their house and coldly said, "Jonathan's wedding needs to be grand. You need to contribute $50,000. I thought I had hit rock bottom in my grief, but I was wrong. Because on the day of the wedding, I prepared a gift that left their entire family stunned in front of all the guests. Hello, my name is Calvin Monroe. I'm 33 years old, living in Charleston, South Carolina, a small city with streets shaded by oak trees and the salty air of the sea. I'm not anyone special, just an ordinary guy working as a manager at a gas station in the suburbs. It's not a glamorous job, but I take pride in working hard every day to provide for my wife, Scarlett, and our 2 daughters, Ella and Madison. Ella is 8 with golden hair that shines like sunlight, always chattering about school. Madison is 5, shyer, but when she smiles, it's like the whole world lights up. They are everything to me, and I always thought our family, though simple, was a complete and happy home. But life, as I learned the hard way, never warns you how it's going to knock you down. One October day, with Charleston's sky gray and ominous, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was a moment I'll never forget, the moment my world shattered. I was standing behind the counter at the gas station, wiping an oil stain off the table when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I picked up, thinking it might be a customer asking for directions or checking our hours. But on the other end was a man's voice, deep and solemn, introducing himself as a police officer. "Are you Calvin Monroe, son of Leo Monroe and Eloise Monroe?" he asked. My heart stopped. My parents. They were on their way from Columbia to visit us, bringing some homemade orange marmalade from Mom and a few old toys Dad had dug out of the garage for Ella and Madison. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and said, "Yes, that's me." Then he spoke, his voice steady. "I'm very sorry to have to tell you this. Your parents were in a car accident on I-26. They didn't make it." I froze. My body felt like it was encased in ice, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My ears rang, each word falling into a void. I heard myself mumble, my voice choked like a gust of wind escaping my throat. What did you say?" But my mind was blank, unable to process. The officer continued, explaining that a truck had lost control and crashed into my parents' car. They were gone instantly. I don't remember how I hung up, only that I asked to leave my shift, climbed into my old pickup truck, and drove straight to the morgue as the police had directed. Charleston had never felt so distant. The streets, the trees, the traffic lights, all blurred in my vision. I just wanted to get there, to believe it was a mistake, that my parents were still out there somewhere, laughing and telling stories like always. The morgue was cold, reeking of antiseptic. An employee led me to a small room where 2 bodies lay under white sheets. I stood there, my feet rooted to the ground, unable to step forward. "Are you ready?" the employee asked, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of routine. I nodded, though I was never ready for this. He pulled back the sheets, and there they were. My dad, Leo, with his salt and pepper hair and a smile that was no longer there. My mom, Eloise, her kind face now pale, her eyes closed as if asleep. I wanted to scream, to shake them awake, to say this wasn't real. But I just stood there, tears streaming hot down my cheeks. I confirmed their identities, signed some papers, and felt like a part of me died too. As an only child, everything fell on my shoulders. The funeral, the paperwork, the notifications, it was all my responsibility. I started making calls one by one, informing relatives, friends, and my parents' neighbors in Columbia. "It can't be," Judy, their longtime neighbor, cried out, her voice breaking. Leo and Eloise. They were at my house just last week, bringing cookies. I listened, my heart twisting, but I kept my voice steady, promising to share details about the funeral. Uncle Frank, my dad's best friend, was silent on the line before saying, "Stay strong, Calvin. They were so proud of you." I didn't know how strong I could be, only that I had to do my duty. The last call was to Scarlett, my wife. I needed her more than ever. I needed to hear her voice, to feel her arms around me, to hear her say we'd get through this together. I called her from the morgue's parking lot, my hands trembling uncontrollably. When she answered, I heard laughter and upbeat music in the background. "Calvin? What's wrong?" she asked, her tone light but rushed. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Scarlett, my parents. They were in an accident. They're gone. The funeral's this weekend." There was a pause, then she said, her voice flat, "Oh my God, Calvin, I'm so sorry. But, this weekend I'm really busy. My parents are throwing a BBQ to plan Jonathan's wedding. The kids and I can't make it." I thought I'd misheard. "A BBQ," I repeated, my voice faltering. "Scarlett, this is my parents' funeral. I need you. I need Ella and Madison." She sighed, as if I was inconveniencing her. "Calvin, you can handle it, right?" A sharp pain stabbed through my chest like someone had driven a knife into me. My wife, the woman I married 10 years ago, the one I thought would always be by my side, had just told me she was too busy with a barbecue to attend my parents' funeral. I wanted to yell into the phone, to ask what she was thinking, but I just hung up, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped the phone. The days that followed were like a nightmare. I threw myself into preparing the funeral, trying to make everything perfect for my parents' final farewell. I chose the coffins, contacted the church, arranged the flowers, wrote the obituary. Each task felt like salt in an open wound. My parents weren't wealthy, but they gave me a childhood filled with love. And now, I had to bury them, alone. Relatives and friends of my parents called constantly, sharing stories about them, their kindness, how they always helped others despite having little themselves. "Leo helped me fix my roof in the middle of a storm," Uncle Frank recalled. "Eloise always brought food when my wife was sick," Judy added. Those stories warmed my heart and broke it at the same time. I wanted Scarlett to hear them, to understand how wonderful my parents were. But she wasn't there. I tried not to think about Scarlett, but every night when I returned to our empty house, the pain surged back. Ella and Madison were with their grandparents, preparing for Jonathan's damn wedding. The house, once filled with the girls' laughter, was now silent, just me and my memories of my parents. I sat on the couch staring at the family photo on the wall. Dad, Mom, me, Scarlett, and our daughters. Their smiles in the picture reminded me to be strong, but inside I just wanted to collapse. The night before the funeral, I sat down to write the eulogy. I wanted to say something meaningful, something worthy of my parents. But every time I started, tears fell. I wrote, erased, and wrote again because no words felt enough to capture their love. Finally, I folded the paper, telling myself I'd speak from the heart tomorrow. But deep down, I was terrified. Not of speaking in front of a crowd, but of knowing that when I stood before my parents' coffins, I'd be utterly alone. No Scarlett, no Ella, no Madison. Just me, facing the greatest loss of my life. The morning of the funeral, I woke up in an empty room, the dim light filtering through the old curtains. The Charleston sky was gloomy, covered in gray clouds, as if the whole world was in mourning. I put on the black suit my dad once complimented, adjusting my tie in front of the mirror, trying to hide my swollen eyes and deep, dark circles. I drove to the funeral home, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying not to let my mind drift back to the days when my parents were still here. The funeral home was on the outskirts of Charleston, a small building with white walls and stained glass windows glimmering faintly in the weak light. As I stepped inside, the heavy scent of lilies mixed with the cold air sent a shiver through me. 2 oak coffins stood side by side in the center of the room, adorned with white and yellow flowers, Mom's favorite colors. I stood silently before them, my hand touching the cold wood, trying to imagine my parents inside. But I couldn't. They didn't belong here, not in these cold coffins. Gradually, people began to arrive. The sound of footsteps, whispers, and comforting hugs filled the room. Judy, my parents' longtime neighbor, approached me, her eyes red and teary. She hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "Calvin, I can't believe it," she choked out. "Leo and Eloise were the best people. They always helped others, never expecting anything in return." I nodded, forcing a smile, but my throat tightened. Uncle Frank, my dad's best friend, patted my shoulder, his voice low. "Stay strong, Calvin." Relatives, friends, and neighbors trickled in, bringing stories about my parents. Those stories were like puzzle pieces, painting a picture of two people who lived simple but meaningful lives. I stood there, listening, both proud and heartbroken. I wanted my parents here to hear how people spoke of them, to see their smiles knowing they were so loved. But they were gone, and I was left with only memories. Amid the growing crowd, I felt a painful void. Scarlett wasn't there. Neither were Ella nor Madison. Not a single person from my wife's family showed up. I looked around, noticing curious glances and unspoken questions. "Where's Scarlett, Calvin?" Judy asked softly, her voice full of concern. I dodged the question, mumbling something about Scarlett being busy with family matters. "Oh, I see." She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. Others began to wonder too, their whispers spreading through the room. "Where's his wife? Aren't the kids coming?" I felt humiliated, as if the whole world was looking at me with pity. Each question, each glance cut deeper into my pride. The ceremony began. The priest read prayers, his warm voice resonating in the quiet space. I stood by the coffins, clutching the eulogy I'd written and rewritten all night. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium, my legs heavy as lead. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "My parents," I began, "were ordinary people, but they lived extraordinary lives." I spoke of Dad, the construction worker who worked overtime to buy me new school shoes. I spoke of Mom, the strong woman who always saved the best portions of food for Dad and me. I told of evenings gathered around the dinner table, of Dad teaching me to fix my bike, of Mom hugging me when I failed. Each word was a fragment of memory, both sweet and agonizing. Tears began to fall, and I didn't wipe them away. I wanted everyone to see how much I loved my parents, even as my heart was breaking. After the ceremony, the procession moved to the cemetery a few miles from the funeral home. A light rain began to fall, the droplets pattering on my suit, seeping coldly through the fabric. The two coffins were placed side by side, ready to be lowered. I stood before the graves, staring into the deep, dark holes, feeling as if I were being buried too. Relatives and friends stood around, but no one approached. They knew I needed space, but that solitude suffocated me. I wanted Scarlett here, holding my hand, telling me she understood my pain. I wanted to hear Ella call Daddy, to feel Madison cling to my leg as she always did. But there was no one. Just me, standing alone before my parents' graves with a grief so heavy it threatened to tear my chest apart. As the coffins were lowered, the sound of dirt hitting the wood echoed like hammer blows to my heart. I looked at my parents one last time, trying to etch their images in my mind. Dad with his kind smile, Mom with her gentle eyes. Then they were gone, forever beneath the cold earth. I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down my face and I sobbed uncontrollably, my body trembling as if it might collapse. Uncle Frank stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder, guiding me away from the grave's edge. "You okay, Calvin?" he asked, his voice worried. I didn't answer, just shook my head. I wasn't okay. I was dying inside. Judy came closer, hugging me, whispering, "They're in a better place, Calvin. They'll always watch over you." But those words of comfort couldn't ease the pain. I felt the loneliness clearly for the first time in my life. People gradually left, offering condolences and hurried hugs. The rain stopped, but the air remained heavy and damp. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave my parents alone in the ground. I sat down in front of their fresh graves, my hand touching the headstones engraved with their names. Leo Monroe, Eloise Monroe. Those names, once my entire world, were now just words on stone. I looked around. The cemetery was silent save for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. No one was here anymore, just me, and the loneliness enveloped me like a shadow. I sat there quietly, drowning in loss and emptiness. "Dad, Mom," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I promised to live well the way you taught me, but I don't know how when everything is falling apart." There was no answer, only the wind and the cold silence of the cemetery. The darkness gradually enveloped the cemetery, but I didn't want to leave. Sitting in front of my parents' fresh graves, I felt as if I were facing an entire lifetime. Theirs and mine, built from the simple yet meaningful days we shared. Memories flooded back, vivid as if they happened yesterday, pulling me away from the cold cemetery and back to my childhood, where I grew up in the loving embrace of my parents. I was born and raised in Columbia, over 100 miles from Charleston, in an ordinary working-class neighborhood where old wooden houses stood side by side. Our family wasn't wealthy. My dad, Leo Monroe, was a construction worker, spending his days under a hard hat, toiling beneath South Carolina's scorching sun or in its damp rains. My mom, Eloise, worked as a waitress at a small diner where the smell of toasted bread and coffee mingled, and where she always wore a smile despite her aching feet after long shifts. Our house was modest, with just enough room for a cramped living room, a simple kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. But in that house, I never felt deprived. My parents turned it into a home brimming with love even when their wallets were empty. Dad was a tall man with calloused hands from wielding a shovel his whole life. He often worked overtime, sometimes coming home late at night, his clothes caked with cement dust. Yet he'd still smile when he saw me run to greet him. "How's it going, kid?" he'd ask, ruffling my hair, even though I knew he was so exhausted he could barely stand. Once when I asked why he worked so much, he just smiled, his eyes gleaming with determination. "For you, Calvin. I want you to have a better future than I did." As a child, I didn't fully grasp the weight of those words, but now, sitting before his grave, I realized Dad had sacrificed his entire life so I could forge my own path. Mom was different, petite but strong, like a breeze that never stopped blowing. Waitressing wasn't easy. She dealt with demanding customers, hectic days with no breaks, and meager tips. But she never complained. She pinched every penny, sometimes skipping meals to save the best portions for Dad and me. I still remember when I was about 10 seeing her secretly eat a customer's leftover bread just to save the meat in the fridge for us. When I asked, she smiled, brushing my hair. "I'm full, sweetheart. You eat, grow up strong." I believed her then, but thinking back now, I want to cry for her quiet sacrifices. Though we were poor, our family was filled with love. Evenings were spent gathered around the small kitchen table, eating simple meals. Mashed potatoes, fried chicken, or Mom's stewed beans. Dad would tell stories about his younger days working as a mechanic and nearly getting crushed when he fell asleep under a car. Mom would sing old folk songs, her warm voice making it feel like the world was just us. After dinner, Dad would often pull out his old guitar, strum a few chords, and Mom and I would listen, laughing when he deliberately sang the wrong lyrics. Those moments, though simple, were the treasures of my childhood. On weekends, if Dad didn't have to work overtime, we'd stroll to the Riverside Park. Dad would push me on my old bike, teaching me to balance, patient even when I kept falling. "It's okay, Calvin," he'd say, cleaning the scrapes on my knees. "You fall, you get back up. That's how a man lives." Mom would bring sandwiches and we'd sit on the grass watching the river sparkle under the sun. She'd tell me about her dreams as a young woman, wanting to be a teacher but having to drop out to support her family. "But I don't regret it," she'd say, looking at me with gentle eyes, "because I have you. And that's the best thing of all." My parents didn't just give me love, they taught me lessons that are etched into my soul. They always emphasized that kindness, responsibility, and family mattered more than money or status. Money runs out, but kindness lasts forever. Dad once said when I asked why he helped a neighbor fix their house for free. Mom taught me to live responsibly. You can do anything, Calvin, as long as you don't hurt anyone and always take care of the ones you love. As a kid, those were just passing words. But now, they're like a guiding light, reminding me that I'm the son of Leo and Eloise Monroe, people who lived lives worth being proud of. Sitting before their graves, those memories played like a slow-motion film, warming my heart. But then I thought of the present, and the pain surged back, sharper than ever. Scarlett, my wife, the woman I thought would build a family with me like my parents did, chose a BBQ over standing by me on the day I said goodbye to them. Her family, Bruce, Joanne, and even Jonathan, didn't show up, didn't offer a single word of condolence. Their coldness and selfishness felt like a knife, slicing deep into my heart. The darkness had fully cloaked the cemetery with only the faint glow of distant streetlights. I stood up, my legs heavy, but in my heart I felt a spark of strength from my parents. They taught me to rise after every fall, and I knew though I was lonelier than ever, I had to keep moving forward. 3 days after the funeral, my phone rang. It was Bruce, my father-in-law. I frowned, wondering why he was calling. A small spark of hope flickered in my chest. Perhaps he wanted to check on me, offer condolences, or say something to ease my pain. I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Hello, Dad?" "Calvin, are you free?" Bruce's voice came through, not warm or friendly, but curt, like he was speaking to an employee. "Your mom and I need to see you. There's something important to discuss. Can you come by this afternoon?" I hesitated, a sense of unease creeping in. "What's it about? Can't we talk over the phone?" I asked, hoping he'd mention something about my parents, the funeral. But he replied brusquely, "Just come by, 5 o'clock. Then he hung up. I sat there, phone still in hand, feeling as if I'd been doused with cold water. But I told myself this might be a chance to mend things. Maybe Bruce and Joanne wanted to apologize in person for not attending the funeral, to say something that would make me feel like I was still part of their family. I grabbed my jacket, took my keys, and drove to my in-laws' house on the other side of Charleston. On the way, I tried to focus on positive thoughts. Maybe Scarlett would be there, ready to hug me, to say she was wrong. Maybe Ella and Madison would run out, throw their arms around me, and we'd all go home together. Bruce and Joanne's house was in a fancier part of town than mine, with large homes, neatly trimmed lawns, and shiny cars parked out front. I pulled up in my old pickup truck, feeling out of place in the scene. When I knocked, Joanne opened the door, offering a strained smile. "Calvin, come in," she said, but her eyes held no warmth. I stepped into the living room where Bruce sat in an armchair holding a coffee mug. Scarlett wasn't there, nor were Ella or Madison. My heart sank, but I tried to stay composed. "Sit down, Calvin," Bruce said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat, feeling like a student called to the principal's office. Joanne sat beside Bruce, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes scanning me as if sizing me up. No one asked about the funeral, my parents, or what I'd been through. The air in the room was heavy, and my unease grew. "Let's get to the point," Bruce said, his voice even but cold. "Jonathan's getting married. Camilla's a good girl from a respectable family. We want to throw a grand wedding, one that reflects our family's status. But it's not cheap, and we need your help." I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Help?" I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. Bruce nodded, as if it were obvious. "Yes. $50,000. You're part of this family. This is your responsibility." I sat there, stunned, feeling as if I'd been slapped. $50,000? I had just buried my parents, gone through the most painful days of my life, and now they were calling me here to demand money? I looked at Joanne, hoping she'd say something different, but she just nodded, adding, "Calvin, you don't have parents to support anymore, right? Your money should go to this family, to Jonathan's future." Her words were like a knife, slicing straight into my heart. Not only were they demanding money, but they were using my parents' deaths as a justification for their callousness. I wanted to scream, to ask if they had any shred of humanity left. I had just lost my parents, stood alone by their graves, and now they sat here, not offering a single word of condolence, not showing a hint of care, only focused on my wallet. But I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I don't have that kind of money, I said, my voice hoarse. Bruce frowned, as if I'd said something foolish. Calvin, you manage a gas station, you make decent money. Save a little, figure it out. You'll manage. This is a family matter. Joanne chimed in, her voice sweet but insincere. Jonathan's Scarlett's brother. Don't you want him to have a proper wedding? I looked at them, the two people I once called Mom and Dad, who I thought were family. But now I saw only selfishness and disregard. They didn't see me as a person, didn't see the pain I was carrying. They saw me as a wallet, a tool to serve their interests. I stood up, my legs trembling, but I kept my voice steady. I need time to think about it. Bruce shrugged as if that was the response he expected. Fine, but don't take too long, Calvin. The wedding's coming up. I left their house, stepping out to my truck in a daze. Rain began to fall, droplets rolling down the windshield, blurring the streetlights. I sat in the driver's seat, not starting the engine, just staring into the darkness ahead. Rage welled up, mingling with the pain of losing my parents, forming a storm in my chest. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, feeling like the dam was about to break. I thought of Dad, of Mom, of the years they sacrificed to give me a better life. I thought of the lessons they taught me, about self-respect, kindness, and not letting anyone trample on me. And I knew I couldn't let Scarlett's family keep treating me like this, but I didn't know what to do. Fight back? Argue? Or keep swallowing the bitterness as I had for 10 years of marriage? I drove home, my heart heavy. The pain, the anger, and the loneliness weighed on me, but deep inside a small flame began to burn. When I returned home, the house was silent, devoid of sound or warmth. Scarlett and the kids still hadn't come back. I sat waiting in the living room, the clock ticking away the seconds. Finally, as darkness fell, I heard the jingle of keys at the door. Scarlett walked in, followed by Ella and Madison. Ella ran to me, shouting, "Daddy!" and threw her arms around me. Madison, shyer, just smiled and held my hand. In that moment, I felt a flicker of warmth, but when I looked at Scarlett, I knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. "Go play upstairs, girls," I said, keeping my tone gentle. Ella nodded, pulling Madison up the stairs, leaving Scarlett and me alone in the living room. She stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, her eyes cold. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger rising in my chest. "Scarlett," I began, my voice hoarse, "why didn't you come to my parents' funeral?" Scarlett frowned as if I'd asked a ridiculous question. "The funeral," she said, her voice flat. "Calvin, you know I was busy. I told you the girls and I had to be at my parents' house." I felt my blood rush to my head. "A BBQ? That's why you weren't there when I needed you most?" I looked at her, waiting for an explanation, an apology, or anything to show she cared. But Scarlett just sighed, running a hand through her golden hair. "Funerals are just formalities, Calvin. You know that. Jonathan's wedding is about the family's future, a big step forward. I had to prioritize." I clenched my fists, struggling to stay calm. "Formalities? My parents just died. I stood alone by their graves without you, without the girls. You think that's unimportant?" She shrugged as if I were blowing a small matter out of proportion. "Calvin, you're making a big deal out of this. I was busy and I thought you could handle it." Her words cut like a sharp, cold knife. My heart tightened, but I pressed on. "And what about your parents demanding $50,000 for Jonathan's wedding? You knew about it, didn't you? And you didn't say anything?" Scarlett looked at me, her eyes narrowing, and then she let out a bitter, mocking laugh I'd never heard before. $50,000? Oh, come on, Calvin, you sound like a cheapskate. He's my brother. Don't you want him to have a decent wedding? Aren't you part of this family? I stood frozen, unable to believe what I'd heard. This family? I repeated, my voice trembling. Scarlett, my parents just died. I buried them alone while you and your family were barbecuing and laughing. When I needed you most, you weren't there. And now you dare talk about family? What kind of family disregards someone's pain like this? She stiffened, her lips pressing into a tight line. Then she spoke, her voice icy. Your parents were nothing but poor nobodies, Calvin. What did they leave you? A rundown house and some worthless junk. Jonathan's wedding is a chance for my family to rise, to have a better future. You should be proud to contribute. My blood boiled as if the world were collapsing around me. My parents, who worked themselves to exhaustion, who went hungry to provide for me, were called poor nobodies. I fought to stay composed, standing up and stepping closer to her. Scarlett, do you know how much I've been hurting? I needed you, needed the girls, but you weren't there. And now you dare insult my parents as if they were nothing. So what am I to you? Just a wallet for you and your family to use? She stared at me, not a trace of remorse in her eyes. Calvin, you're blowing this out of proportion. You're always so sensitive. If you don't want to help, fine. But don't expect me to feel guilty for doing what's best for my family. I stepped back, feeling my heart tear apart. That was the final blow. Scarlett hadn't just abandoned me, hadn't just stayed silent about her family's selfishness. She belittled my parents and treated me like a tool for profit. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of thinking we were a family, vanished in that moment. I realized she never truly loved me, never valued the principles my parents instilled in me. I turned away, saying nothing more. I couldn't stay in this house, a place that belonged to Scarlett's family. The house was in Bruce and Joanne's names, not mine. I'd lived in their shadow for too long, and now I had to break free. I went upstairs, packed my clothes, a few personal items, and the family photo with my parents. Ella and Madison ran down, asking, "Where are you going, Daddy?" I knelt, hugging them tightly, fighting back tears. "Daddy has something important to do, and I'll be gone for a while," I said, my voice breaking. "But I'll come back for you. I promise." Scarlett stood at the staircase, arms crossed, looking at me with disdain. "What are you doing, Calvin? Running away? You'll regret this soon enough. Without me, you're nothing." Her words were like venomous arrows, but I didn't respond. I gave her one last look, her eyes cold and without a hint of regret. I grabbed my bag, walked out the door, and heard her mocking laugh behind me. I drove into the night with no destination, just wanting to get away from Scarlett, from the family that had crushed my self-respect. I stopped at a cheap motel on the outskirts of Charleston where neon lights flickered and the air smelled of mildew. I rented a small room, dropped my bag on the floor, and lay on the hard bed staring at the stained ceiling. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't do anything. I just lay there, feeling the emptiness and pain, but the small flame inside me still burned. The days that followed passed in a haze. I lived like a shadow, going to work, returning to the motel, eating cheap meals from the convenience store, and trying not to think about the future. Scarlett didn't contact me, and I didn't want to hear her voice. I just wanted time to stop, to give me a chance to figure out how to move forward, but life waits for no one. I began to think I'd be stuck forever in that motel room, trapped in pain and helplessness. Until one afternoon when a phone call changed everything. It was a Wednesday and Charleston's sky was still overcast, as if the weather mirrored my mood. I was sitting on the motel bed eating a sandwich from a nearby shop when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code was from Columbia, where my parents had lived. I frowned, answered cautiously. "Hello, who's this?" "Is this Calvin Monroe?" a man's voice asked, polite but serious. "I'm Robert Hayes, the attorney for Leo and Eloise Monroe. I have an important matter to discuss. Are you free? Can we meet tomorrow morning?" I froze. An attorney? My parents? I mumbled, "Yes, sure. But what's this about?" Hayes replied briefly, "I'll explain when we meet. 10 o'clock, all right?" Then he hung up, leaving me with a whirlwind of questions. I couldn't sleep that night. I thought of my parents, their frugal lives, how they always gave me the best of everything. An attorney? My parents weren't the type to deal with legal matters. They lived simply with no significant assets or disputes. I racked my brain searching for any clue but found none. Their house in Colombia was a modest one, paid off, and I knew they had no substantial savings. So what did this attorney want? I lay in bed staring at the stained ceiling, feeling both curious and uneasy. The next morning I drove to Hayes's office, a small but tidy building in downtown Columbia. I wore the cleanest shirt left in my bag, trying to look presentable, though I knew I couldn't hide the exhaustion on my face. Robert Hayes, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and gold-rimmed glasses, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Monroe," he said, his voice gentle but carrying a serious undertone. He led me to a small room where a thick folder sat on the desk. I sat down, my heart racing, sensing I was about to uncover a secret. "First," Hayes began, adjusting his glasses, "I want to say I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Leo and Eloise were wonderful people. I knew them years ago when they came to me for advice on some matters." I nodded, my throat tightening at the mention of their names. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. "But why am I here?" Hayes gave a small smile and slid the folder toward me. "Your parents, Leo and Eloise, purchased a life insurance policy over 15 years ago. They named you as the sole beneficiary." I blinked, trying to process his words. Life insurance? My parents? I shook my head as if it couldn't be true. Life insurance? They never told me about this. "That's right," Hayes nodded. "They wanted it to be a secret to ensure you'd be taken care of if anything happened. This policy is substantial, Calvin. Once the paperwork is finalized, you'll receive approximately $800,000. I sat stunned, as if struck by lightning. $800,000. It was more money than I'd ever imagined. I worked as a gas station manager, earning enough to get by, but I'd never dreamed of such a sum. I looked at Hayes, thinking he might be joking, but his eyes were serious, and the folder in front of me was real. With trembling hands, I opened the folder, scanning pages filled with signatures and numbers. They all bore my parents' names, Leo and Eloise Monroe. I thought of their frugal years, how Mom skipped meals to save money for me, how Dad worked overtime in the blazing sun. They had sacrificed everything, and now they'd left me enough to rebuild my life. Tears welled up, not for the money, but for their love. They had planned ahead, thought of me until their final days without ever boasting or telling me. "There's one more thing," Hayes said, sliding a pale yellow envelope toward me. "This is a letter your parents left. They asked me to keep it and give it to you if something happened." I took the envelope, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped it. My mother's handwriting, soft but clear, spelled out my name, Calvin. I thanked Hayes and left, clutching the envelope. My heart pounded the entire drive, but I didn't have the courage to open it right away. Only when I was back in the dim motel room under the weak glow of the yellow light did I carefully tear open the envelope and begin to read. "Dear Calvin, our beloved son. If you're reading this, we're probably no longer there to hug you, to tell you how proud we are of you. You are our greatest joy, the reason we woke up every day no matter how hard life was. We didn't have much money or a grand house, but we did our best to give you a good life, to show you that love is what matters most. Life isn't easy, son. There will be times when you feel alone, hurt, or trampled on. But we want you to remember, you are the son of Leo and Eloise Monroe. You are stronger than you know. Don't let anyone walk over you or make you forget your worth. Though we were poor, we always believed you would live a life worthy of pride, full of kindness and responsibility as we taught you. We left you this insurance policy hoping it will help when we're no longer here. Use it to build your life, to care for those you love, and to live true to yourself. We love you. Forever. With all our love, Mom and Dad **. I read the letter, tears falling onto the words, blurring the ink. They were gone, but this letter was like a final embrace, a reminder that I was never truly alone. I folded it, pressing it to my chest, feeling my heart beat stronger. The small flame inside me now roared, fiercer than ever. I thought of Scarlett, her family, how they belittled me and my parents. I thought of her mocking words, a nobody, no money, no status, and I gave a bitter smile. They didn't know that my parents had left me something more valuable than any sum of money. They had given me the strength to stand up, to refuse to be trampled. 3 weeks had passed since I received the letter and the news about the life insurance policy. I was still living in the small motel room, still working my daily shifts at the gas station, and trying to stay in touch with Ella and Madison through brief phone calls. Then one afternoon I got a text from Scarlett. "Calvin, Jonathan's wedding is this Saturday. You need to be there. Don't embarrass my family." The message was short, devoid of any warmth, filled only with demands and mockery. I stared at it, feeling as if I'd been slapped. Save face? After everything they'd done, they now wanted me to show up to make them look good? I was ready to refuse, to tell them I had nothing to do with their family anymore. But then an idea sparked in my mind. I smiled, a bitter but determined smile. Fine, I'd go. I'd attend Jonathan's wedding, but not to save their face. I'd give them a gift they'd never forget. I opened my bag, pulling out a stack of documents I'd prepared over the past few days. Bank statements, invoices, receipts, proof of everything I'd paid for Scarlett's family over the past 10 years. I laid them on the table, smoothing each page, feeling a newfound strength coursing through my veins. This would be my way of honoring my parents, of reclaiming my self-respect. Jonathan's wedding took place at a luxurious hotel in downtown Charleston, where crystal chandeliers sparkled and white silk curtains fluttered. I walked into the banquet hall, wearing the same old black suit, the one I'd worn to my parents' funeral. I felt the weight of eyes on me, but they weren't welcoming. They were curious, judgmental, and from some of Scarlett's relatives, openly contemptuous. I held my head high, walking with a calm I'd been cultivating over the past weeks. The hall was packed with guests, from Scarlett's extended family to Jonathan and his bride Camilla's friends. The tables were lavishly decorated with white roses and sparkling wine glasses. Soft violin music filled the air, and the scent of gourmet food wafted around. Jonathan, in a sleek gray suit, stood at the center, beaming, boasting about the extravagant wedding to anyone who'd listen. "We booked a live band from Atlanta," he said to a group of guests, his voice brimming with pride. "Only the best for this day." I stood in a corner watching him, thinking about how this family demanded $50,000 from me to fund this extravagance right after I lost my parents. Bruce and Joanne, Scarlett's parents, passed by me, offering only a cursory nod as if I were an uninvited guest. "Calvin, you made it," Joanne said, her voice sweet but insincere. "Good. Don't do anything to embarrass the family, all right?" I gave a faint smile, saying nothing. Bruce glanced at me, his eyes dripping with disdain. "Heard you didn't contribute anything to the wedding," he said, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. Pretty shameful. I clenched my fists but maintained my calm. They'd soon see what I'd contributed. Scarlett appeared stunning in a shimmering green dress, but when she saw me, she barely glanced my way, offering no smile. She stood beside Jonathan, chatting and laughing with guests, but when I approached, she turned away, as if I were a stranger. Some of Scarlett's relatives whispered behind my back, words like poor and failure reaching my ears. I heard them but didn't turn around. I stood quietly, waiting for my moment. As the wedding moved into the formalities, the MC called me to the podium to speak as the groom's brother-in-law. "Calvin Monroe, please come up to share a few words of congratulations," he said cheerfully. I stepped up, holding the microphone, feeling hundreds of eyes fixed on me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice calm but clear, Today is a special day as Jonathan and Camilla begin their new journey. I wish them happiness and hope they'll cherish each other as a true family should. The crowd gave a light applause, the atmosphere seemingly pleasant. Scarlett relaxed her shoulders as if she thought I'd stop there. But I wasn't done. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and continued, I have a special wedding gift for Jonathan and for this family. I signaled to a hotel staff member who brought up a thick stack of documents and placed it on the podium. The crowd began to murmur, curious. Scarlett frowned, Jonathan tilted his head, and Bruce stiffened. I opened the stack, my voice still calm but sharper now. This is what I've contributed to this family over the past 10 years. These are bank statements, invoices, receipts, proof of every dime I've spent. Family debts, Jonathan's tuition, shopping expenses, home repairs, monthly living costs. Over $200,000, and not once did I receive a thank you. The air in the hall grew tense. I looked straight at Bruce and Joanne, continuing, when my parents passed away, not one person from this family attended their funeral. They chose to throw a BBQ to plan this wedding. They called my parents poor nobodies and demanded $50,000 from me right after I buried them. Today, this is my wedding gift. The truth about this family's greed and ingratitude. The hall erupted in whispers. Guests exchanged glances, some covering their mouths, others staring at Scarlett's family with shock and disapproval. Jonathan's face turned red and he shot up, shouting, Calvin, what are you doing? This is my wedding. Scarlett stood frozen, her eyes red with embarrassment, but she said nothing. Bruce slammed the table, pointing at me. You dare ruin this day? You ungrateful wretch. But I didn't care. I looked them in the eyes, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Ungrateful? I replied, my voice cold. I gave you everything I had and you repaid me with contempt. My parents taught me about self-respect, and today I'm taking it back. I set the microphone down, stepped off the podium, and walked out of the hall. I didn't look back, ignoring Jonathan's shouts, Scarlett's tears, or Bruce's accusations. I stepped outside, breathing in Charleston's cool air, feeling as if I'd just escaped a prison. The aftermath of my speech at the wedding didn't take long to unfold. The very next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Scarlett called, not once but 5 times in a row, each time leaving an angry voicemail. Calvin, you're a jerk. You ruined Jonathan's wedding. Her voice was sharp, trembling with rage. Who do you think you are, humiliating my family in front of everyone? I sat on the motel bed listening to each message, but I didn't respond. I didn't want to argue over the phone, didn't want to continue the cycle of insults. I wanted to face her one last time to set things straight. I texted Scarlett, meet me at the coffee shop on King Street this afternoon at 4. We need to talk. She replied instantly, fine, but don't expect me to forgive you for what you've done. I gave a bitter smile and set the phone down. Forgiveness. I didn't need her forgiveness. I needed the truth, and I needed to end the marriage that had held me captive for too long. The coffee shop on King Street was a small, cozy place, filled with the rich aroma of roasted coffee and the soft hum of jazz music. I arrived early, sitting in a corner by the window. Charleston bustled outside with people passing by, but I felt like I was in a different world. I thought about the 10 years of marriage with Scarlett, about the early days when she'd smiled brightly, saying she loved my simplicity. I had believed her, thought we'd build a happy family together. But now I realized she never truly understood me, never valued me. Scarlett walked in, wearing a simple but elegant green dress, exuding her usual air of haughtiness. She sat across from me, arms crossed, her eyes cold. Well, Calvin, she began, her voice icy. What do you want? To apologize for ruining my brother's wedding? I looked at her, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. No, Scarlett, I replied calmly. I'm not apologizing. I'm here to tell you this marriage is over. She blinked, as if she couldn't believe her ears. Over? Are you joking? I shook my head, keeping my gaze steady. I'm not joking. After everything you and your family have done, I can't go on. You don't respect me, you don't value our marriage, and I can't live with someone like that anymore." Scarlett let out a mocking laugh, but I saw her eyes begin to redden. "Calvin, you're a failure," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You think you can leave me and survive? The house we live in belongs to my parents. You have nothing. No money, no status, nothing. Without me, you'll be a nobody, scraping by for the rest of your life." Her words were like knives, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard enough insults, and this time I refused to let them hurt me. "Scarlett," I said, my voice steady. "Material things can be lost, but self-respect and freedom are worth everything. I'd rather live like that than with someone who doesn't respect me or my parents." She glared at me, but I continued. "I'm filing for divorce. We're done." She lost control, standing abruptly, making the table shake. "Divorce? Fine, Calvin. But you'll have to raise Ella and Madison. You think you can handle that? A gas station manager living in a motel raising 2 kids? She laughed loudly, a venomous laugh, as if she thought she had the upper hand. I looked at her, and for the first time in the conversation, I smiled. Scarlett didn't know about my parents' life insurance policy, enough to rebuild my life, enough to care for Ella and Madison without a court battle. She thought I was a failure, but she didn't know my parents had given me a chance to start over, and I wouldn't let her stand in my way. "Don't worry, Scarlett," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'll take care of the girls. I'll give them a good life the way my parents did for me. You can keep your parents' house. I don't need it." She froze, her eyes filled with confusion. She didn't understand why I was so confident, and I had no intention of explaining. I stood up, left a few dollars on the table for the coffee, and walked out. Scarlett shouted after me, "You'll regret this, Calvin. You won't make it." But I didn't turn back. I'd heard enough. The next day, I went to a divorce attorney's office. I filed for divorce, requesting a clean break from Scarlett and her family. I asked for custody of Ella and Madison, knowing the insurance money would help me prove my financial stability in court. I didn't want a fight, didn't want to drag things out, just wanted to end it all and start anew. As I left the attorney's office, a cool breeze swept through, as if Charleston were welcoming a new version of me. I was in pain. Pain from the collapse of a 10-year marriage, from Scarlett's insults, from not wanting Ella and Madison to endure a broken family. But at the same time, I felt at peace, as if I'd finally shed the chains that had bound me for so long. My parents' letter, still in my pocket, was a reminder that I wasn't alone. They had believed in me, left me not just money, but the strength to stand tall. A month later, I left the musty motel room and moved into a small apartment in the suburbs of Charleston. It wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a modest kitchen. But it was mine, a place where I could build a true home for myself and my daughters. I stood in the apartment, looking at the bare walls and worn floors, but I didn't feel emptiness. I saw potential, a chance to start over. I bought some simple furniture, a blue sofa, a wooden dining table, and 2 beds for Ella and Madison. I hung the old family photo, Dad, Mom, and me, on the living room wall right next to a new one of me with my daughters. It was my way of reminding myself that despite a painful past, I still had loved ones to live for. The life insurance money from my parents, $800,000, was a gift I never dared dream of. I met with a financial advisor, carefully planning how to use it wisely. First, I paid off the small debts Scarlett and I had accumulated over the years. Credit card bills, home repair loans, things I'd shouldered alone. I opened a savings account for Ella and Madison, ensuring they'd have college funds no matter what the future held. I set aside money for living expenses, from rent to school fees to weekend outings with the girls. And most importantly, I reserved a portion to invest in a dream I'd never dared to pursue, starting my own business. I never imagined myself as an entrepreneur. I was just a gas station manager, used to checking invoices and ensuring the pumps worked. But my parents taught me that nothing is impossible if I believe in myself. I decided to start a small service company providing equipment and maintenance for gas stations and convenience stores around Charleston. I began modestly, renting a small office, buying basic equipment, and reaching out to industry contacts. I worked transparently and honestly, just as my parents had lived. "Kindness will take you far," Dad once said, and I wanted my business to reflect that value. The early days weren't easy. I stayed up late planning, calling clients, and learning how to run a business. But whenever I felt exhausted, I opened my parents' letter, reread their words, and found the strength to keep going. The change wasn't just financial, it was mental. In the weeks after leaving Scarlett, I was like a hollow shell, going through the motions and returning to a cold motel room. But now, I chose to live differently. I started exercising, jogging along the river each morning. I bought books on management and personal growth, reading them at night after the girls were asleep. I joined a community group in Charleston, helping repair homes for struggling families, just as Dad used to do. Each small step helped me rebuild my confidence bit by bit. Ella and Madison became my light. After filing for divorce, I was granted weekend and some weekday visitation with them. The first time they came to the new apartment, I worried about how they'd react. It was much smaller than the old house, with no backyard or fancy furniture. But when Ella ran in shouting, "Daddy, this place is so cool," and Madison hugged my leg with a shy smile, I knew I'd made the right choice. I spent every moment I could with them, taking them to the park, making sandwiches like Mom used to, telling them about their grandparents. "Your grandma and grandpa loved you so much," I said, pointing to the photo on the wall. "Grandpa taught me how to fix bikes, and Grandma made the best orange marmalade in the world." Ella laughed, asking, "Can you make marmalade, Daddy?" I chuckled, promising to try, though I knew I'd never match Mom's skill. The girls grew closer to me. Ella started sharing stories about school and new friends, and Madison, though shy, began hugging me longer when I dropped them off at Scarlett's. I realized they needed me, not a rich or successful dad, but a loving and responsible one. Every time I saw their smiles, I felt stronger, as if their love was fueling the fire within me. Sometimes I still thought of my parents, and the pain would resurface. I missed Dad's booming laugh, Mom's gentle eyes, the evenings we spent around the dinner table. Some nights I sat alone in the apartment, holding their letter, and tears would fall. But now, those tears weren't from despair. I smiled when I thought of them, knowing I was living up to their words. "Live strong, don't let anyone bully you," they wrote, and I was doing just that. I was building a new life, not just for myself, but for Ella and Madison, the way my parents would have wanted. Public opinion in Charleston began to shift. People I knew from the gas station, old neighbors, and those I met in the community group started seeing me differently. They heard about what I did at Jonathan's wedding, how I exposed the truth about Scarlett's family, and they admired me. "You were brave, Calvin," Uncle Frank, Dad's best friend, said when I ran into him at a coffee shop. "Leo and Eloise would be proud of you." Judy, our old neighbor, hugged me and said, "You stood up like a real man." Their words warmed my heart, but I didn't do it for praise. I did it to live true to my values, to my parents' values. Meanwhile, Scarlett's family faced the fallout from the wedding scandal. Rumors spread quickly in Charleston about how they abandoned me at my parents' funeral, their insults, their selfishness. Some acquaintances said Bruce and Joanne appeared less at social events, as if avoiding judgmental stares. Jonathan, I heard, had to take out loans to cover the lavish wedding, and Scarlett lived in bitterness, no longer carrying her former air of superiority. I didn't take joy in their struggles. I didn't want revenge or to see them suffer. I just wanted them to understand that greed and ingratitude would never lead to happiness. One weekend afternoon, Charleston's air was cool, with gentle breezes carrying the salty scent of the sea. I decided to take Ella and Madison to the cemetery where my parents, Leo and Eloise, rested. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, a mix of warmth and sorrow rising in my chest. This was the first time I'd brought the girls to visit their grandparents' graves, and I wanted them to know about the people who loved me, who gave me the strength to be the father I am today. When we arrived at the cemetery, the late afternoon sun cast a soft golden glow over the rows of headstones. I led Ella and Madison to my parents' graves, where the stones engraved with Leo Monroe and Eloise Monroe stood quietly amid the green grass. I knelt, placing a bouquet of white lilies, Mom's favorite flower, on each grave, then lit 3 incense sticks, their smoke curling into the air like a greeting to my parents. Ella looked at me curious and asked, "Daddy, what were Grandma and Grandpa like?" Madison held my hand, her big round eyes waiting for my answer. I sat down on the grass, pulling the girls close, and began to tell them. My voice was gentle but filled with emotion. They were the most wonderful people I ever knew. I shared stories of my childhood, of the love and sacrifices they poured into me, all to ensure I could have the happiness I have today. I paused, catching Ella nodding as if trying to picture it, while Madison gripped my hand tighter, as if afraid I'd stop. I pulled my parents' letter from my pocket, now carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. "Grandma and Grandpa left me a letter," I said, opening it to show them Mom's soft, clear handwriting. In it, they said they were proud of me, that they wanted me to live strong and not let anyone trample me. "They wanted me to have fair enough, Calvin," Ella said, her voice small but firm. "We'll try, but it might not be as good as Grandma's." We sat there under the fading afternoon sun before my parents' graves, and I felt they were smiling somewhere, pleased that I was passing their love on to my daughters. Looking back on the journey I'd been through, I realized I had traveled a long, painful, but necessary road. I had lost my parents, the people who loved me most, in a sudden accident. I had faced utter loneliness on the day of their funeral, standing alone by their graves without Scarlett, Ella, or Madison. I had been betrayed and insulted by my wife and her family, called a failure and treated like a tool for money. But from the ashes of those losses, I had risen. My parents' letter, the insurance money they left, and their unconditional love had given me the strength to be reborn. Sitting before their graves with Ella and Madison by my side, I understood the greatest lesson they left me. True family isn't about material things, but about love and silent sacrifice. My parents didn't leave me a grand house or fame, but they gave me a gift I never expected. And more importantly, they taught me about self-respect, resilience, and unconditional love. "Don't let anyone trample you. Live strong and hold on to your dignity," they wrote, and I had done it. I had risen from pain and betrayal to become the man they always believed in. As the afternoon light faded, I stood, took Ella and Madison's hands, and led them back to the car. "Let's go home," I said, smiling. Charleston stretched out before us, its oak-lined streets and the breath of the sea welcoming us. I knew my journey wasn't over, but I was ready. With my parents' love, my daughters' smiles, and the self-respect I had reclaimed, I would keep moving forward, stronger than ever, 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 stronger than ever,